right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, right now, the polls are all over the place. Literally, anywhere you look, there's something to confirm your priors. One hand, battleground states. They're tighter now between Trump and Biden than they were in 2016 for Hillary and Trump. On the other, the people who hate both candidates are telling pollsters that they're breaking for Biden 2-1. And on the other hand, there's this shy Trump voter effect. But one thing that's been driving me absolutely crazy about all of the polls-driven debate and more is how much it leaves out the many millions of Americans who don't vote in the first place, and how both parties appear locked in a brutal war to win back moderate suburban voters, while workers who lived one blown tire away from bankruptcy before the economic depression are left to rot. Joe Biden's campaign made this push crystal clear yesterday, not just in his speech denouncing riots, which we talk a lot about earlier in the show, but in a much less noticed clarification on his tax plans that it was provided to the Washington Post. Now, Biden's campaign responded to the Washington Post's so-called fact-checker that they would, under no circumstances, allow taxes to be raised on Americans making less than $400,000 a year, including payroll taxes, tax deferrals, retirement accounts, and more. That might sound reasonable, except, as I've reminded so many of you of recent months, Joe Biden, with his declaration, is less progressive on tax policy than Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. In fact, I dug into the data. I discovered that Biden didn't just arrive on $400,000 out of nowhere. It happens to be the approximate number of the top 1% of American households, where the number of households making more than $250,000 is something like 6 or 7% of Americans. So what does that tell you? Biden is making the absolute pledge to hundreds of thousands of the wealthiest households in America that he will not raise their taxes, when previous Democratic nominees like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton say that they would have. That is the realignment happening in Joe Biden's Democratic Party. To the cosmopolitan elites who make between $250,000 and $400,000, Joe Biden has the same message that he has for Wall Street. Nothing will fundamentally change. Crystal and I have asked many times, why wouldn't Biden, in the middle of this moment, out of a matter of political necessity, try to have some ambitious economic plan to garner working class votes who have been destroyed by this economic depression? Well, because to the people that Joe Biden is trying desperately to win over, there is no economic depression. Conversely, they're making more money than before the crisis began, and they've mostly been able to curtail expenses and pay down debt. It's not like the Trump campaign is exactly going after this vote, too. Just last week, Crystal and I interviewed them right here on this show and asked what Trump would do in his second term. Their answer? Tax cuts and deregulation.
What is the economic agenda to get people back to work and make sure they can stay in their homes and be able to provide food for their families?
Well, we're seeing tremendous growth in the economy right now. Obviously, more than 9.3 million jobs created in just the last 3 months. In fact, nearly half of the jobs that were lost because of the coronavirus have already been recovered. But the president wants to continue to do more. It's why he's talking about, in his second term, creating 10 million new jobs in 10 months, bringing 1 million new small businesses online. And that's just by continuing the tax cuts and deregulatory policies that the president has been enacting since day one.
Here's the thing I want to make clear for Republicans. Those voters who voted based on tax policy alone, they're gone. They are and have been cultural liberals for probably the last 15 years. And now that they've got their BS woke politics plus their preferred tax policy, they are never coming back. Which in my view is great, because I never really liked these people in the first place. Instead, opportunity is staring us all in the face, and the Republicans refuse to go for it. Cook Political Report, one of the most respected political analysts out there, notes that Trump is currently on track to pull in 35% of the Latino vote, which is a 7% increase from 2016. It's one of the only demographic groups that he's improved on dramatically since 2016. And as we learned over and over again on the show from Bernie Sanders advisor Chuck Rocha, Latino voters are overwhelmingly interested in working-class economic issues like trade, wages, and healthcare. In other words, they are like most working-class voters of color. You can save the woke spiel. They want to know what you're going to do materially to improve their quality of life. I've been talking a lot recently about this recent Knight Foundation study that profiled the 100 million Americans who don't vote. Now, they're mostly working class, and how they're disproportionately people of color. these Americans have rock-bottom faith in political institutions and dramatically agree with the idea that their vote doesn't matter all that much because they won't benefit from the result either way. The Democrats have made their choice as to who they're going to pander to. And if the Republicans want to survive, then it's time to try actually pandering to working-class Americans for a change, if not just out of morality, then out of political necessity, at least. And you can see, right, Crystal, within that tax policy declaration, they have basically declared nobody but the top 1% of Americans will have their taxes raised. As in, these wealthy suburbanite voters, mortgage interest tax deduction. I mean, these people live for the mortgage deduction, okay? And all these other, salt taxes, many of these other things, they're good. They're completely protected. He basically cut out 6% of the wealthiest households in America. 6%! And again, these are people, I grew up with many of them, right? Like around the Houston suburbs who are like, oh yeah, the Republicans embarrass us, but at least they're with us on taxes. That's like what they would say over and over again. Now, they're good, right? Like they have their party.
So brazen.
Yeah, it really is.
So brazen. It's funny. So we're going to talk to Matt Karp later today for a segment that'll actually air this weekend. He did a deep dive into the data from the Democratic primary. And what he found is there was this media narrative about like, oh, Joe Biden wins the white working class from Bernie Sanders. That's actually not what happened. Yeah. What overwhelmingly happened is that hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of suburbanites flooded into the Democratic primary. It's like the David Frum and the Bill Kristol type coalition flooded into the Democratic primary to make sure that the Democratic Party became the party of Joe Biden rather than Bernie Sanders. Democrats have won these people. Like, it's done.
Forever.
They're not swing voters anymore. And Karp has the great line. He's like, there used to be this question of what are the Patagonia liberals going to do, the Elizabeth Warren types. He's like, no, these are like Chevron and Halliburton Republicans who are coming into the Democratic Party. And so you are absolutely right. If it is just a matter of political strategy, part of what made Trump's campaign so interesting last time around was he had this different theory. It wasn't let's go and chase these people who don't like us anymore and they're moving over anyway. Let's expand the base. Let's talk in a way that people have been taught. Let's give people a reason to be excited. And look, we talk about how hollow it was and what the administration has done, all of those things. But that was the political theory. What was revealing to me at the RNC is like, oh no, they've given up on that theory of change. The entire RNC was like, Donald Trump's not a racist, Donald Trump's not a sexist, and here's some like standard issue corporate Republican Chamber of Commerce stuff with some working class faces on top of it. That is a message squarely aimed at the suburbs. You're not going to win those people back. It ain't happening. They love Biden. They're happy with Biden. They're totally comfortable with Biden. It's exactly because of his issue set. If that is what you're focused on, he's going to return the norms. We're going to be respected abroad again.
Yes.
All your civility politics will be taken care of. And by the way, your taxes aren't going to go up, so we'll be good to go.
No, they want to go to Paris and not feel embarrassed about Trump as their president. I know these people. Like I said, these are the college-educated elite. That's what they care about more than anything in life. And they don't give a damn about anybody out there who is actually really suffering. And it's so brazen. But the Republicans are just trying to chase these people. And I'm like, look at this data. A 7% bump from Trump. And he hasn't done all that much. Let's be honest, right? Like the China trade war, remarkable. But like if that's really all it took in order to get 7% more of Latino voters, and Ryan Gerdusky was on this show, he's dug into the data, 50% of Latino men could vote for Trump in 2020.
I believe that.
That's insane. I mean, that is not something, that's higher than Chris Christie got in New Jersey, higher than George W. Bush got in the state of Texas when they both ran for governor. How did that happen? Only because at least the appearance of talking about trade and wages and blue-collar workers, which consist of so many of these people's jobs. So if you leaned into that and made it more of a policy priority, or do what Chuck Rocha always talks about, go to the community and tell them yourselves, Donald Trump is working in order to make sure that you don't have to slave away or your job is not going to get shipped to China. That is a great, great message, but they don't want to do it. And it wasn't featured at the RNC. It wasn't something that they're even trying in order to make sure happens. It is, and this is what bothers me about it is, for the Democratic Party, it's more an ideological war, like progressive left or the other way. And with the suburban way, but you could win both ways, right? You can't win with the suburban way. That's the thing, is like you no longer have an option. You are living in a fantasy land that these people are ever coming back. It's over on the margins. If you want to be a permanent minority, then continue going down this road. Now, if you ever want to hold office again, you literally have to appeal to more working class voters. Now, in the past, they'd be like, well, let's do all this identity politics nonsense like you saw at the RNC, but still do tax cuts and deregulation. You got to flip it on its head, and they'll just refuse to internalize it. Yeah,
and what makes me sad about all of it is the more that you push working class people out of our politics, then the more, I mean, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes,
because then the only way to win is the suburban route, right?
Bingo.
And so
if they're the only enfranchised people.
Exactly. And I mean, it's deeply destructive to the health of our society. We've been covering here this week the way that our social fabric seems to be unraveling. I mean, when you have in a presidential year, expect just a like standard expectation that probably 40% of voters are not going to turn out. It's the largest single voting bloc is non-voters. Like, that is a deeply destructive and corrosive state of affairs for your democracy. And this type of politics, two parties catering to those who are doing pretty well in the status quo, while half the country at least is struggling just to get by day to day. It, leads you to some very ugly places when you have so many citizens who feel that they have been shut out entirely of legitimate political channels.
Absolutely right.
Coming up, American Airlines cutting its flying capacity by 55%, and layoffs may be looming for many carriers. President of the International Flight Attendants Union, Sarah Nelson, she's going to weigh in on those plans and tell us exactly what is going on there when Rising continues.